So some people have the misconception that you need to have a flat back if you want to maximize pecs and be completely flat. Shoulders don't move that way. There's a few things here that I want to happen. So when I lower that weight down to my chest, I do need not maximal retraction, but I still need some retraction of the scapula. The next thing we need to consider is the way that muscles work when we want to maximize the development of them. Let's talk about the pec muscle particularly. We got to think of every muscle has an origin and insertion, and their job is to pull those 2 points together. That's how we create those joint actions. Okay, that's where we maximize the contraction. Now, the origin of a pec is we have abdominal fibers, sternal portion, and clavicular portion. That's the origin. The insertion is on the outer lip of the bicipital groove. So out on the humerus in front here. Now, when that muscle contracts, the action that it creates is flexion, horizontal adduction, internal rotation. And if we didn't have opposing muscles, dislocation of the humerus. That's the action of a pec. That's the fully contracted position. Remember, the best way to maximize the development of a muscle is to go from full stretch to full contraction, fully lengthened position. So how do we get the fully lengthened position? I take that origin as far away from the insertion as possible. So how do I take the insertion away? 1, retract the scapula. 2, think about it. How do you stretch your pec? Do I stretch my pec back here? Or what do I do with my arm? Or do I stretch my pec out here? So this is called flared elbows. This is how you stretch your pecs, isn't it? No one stretches their pecs here. There's not really much tension on my pec. There's tension on my pec here, where my elbows are flared to 90 degrees. Okay, so shoulder back, abduct the humerus. That's on my insertion. What about the origin? Extend the thoracic spine. So these are the ways that I can increase tension on that muscle. Sternum angle up, chest up. What's the action that's happening in my thoracic spine here? Thoracic extension is required to maximize the tension on the muscle that you are trying to target. So when people say, stop arching, you don't need arch for it, it's like, you're actually objectively wrong. I want to create as much tension on there, and those are the mechanisms of it. Take the origin away from the insertion. That's max length of that muscle. What are the contraindications of this, though? So this is what position of the elbow? What's this called that's associated with bad technique in a bench press? Flared elbows. You hear people say don't flare your elbows because you are creating potential risk of injury on the shoulder. So what's the mechanism of that? Well, I'll explain. Abduction of the humerus decreases the space between the head of the humerus and the acromion. So that's this bone here, which is the top of the scapula here. That's the acromion. Now, at the top of the scapula, there's a muscle that sits on top of that part of the scapula called the supraspinatus. The supraspinatus passes under the acromion and attaches to the top of the humerus. And when I abduct that humerus to 90 degrees, it closes that space and can impinge on that tendon. This is where the bone is rubbing against that tendon and eventually can fray away at that tendon. Okay, now this doesn't happen to everybody because with most people we have a thing called scapulohumeral rhythm, and this abduction of the humerus is paired with upward rotation of the scapula to hold the golf tee under that golf ball. Do we see that? So as I'm moving the humerus, the scapula is also moving, so that space stays open for most people that don't have dysfunctional shoulders. So what causes the dysfunction on the shoulder? It could be tightness in these upper traps, weakness in these lower traps, which is a very common thing, that stop the scapula from rotating to where it needs to be able to position the humerus where you want it to go. So this is where when people say things like, don't flare your elbows in a bench press because it's dangerous, yeah, if you have that type of shoulder where it's not completely functional, where abducting the humerus to 90 degrees closes that space entirely and is rubbing on that supraspinatus tendon. That's not all of us. Some of us it might be, and if that's you, that's the mechanism. For a lot of us, you can bench press safely with your elbows flared. So why don't we all just bench press safely with our elbows flared? Can't load it as much. Why can't I load that as much? Now let's talk about length-tension relationship of a muscle. Okay, understanding the strongest contractile length of a muscle is important here. Let's break it up into 3 components. Fully shortened, mid-range, fully lengthened. Which range of motion is the strongest contractile position? Mid-range is the strongest. What's the weakest? Fully lengthened is the weakest. Where do we tear pecs on a bench press? Fully lengthened, when the bar is where? On the chest. And usually when the elbows are flared. So to reduce tension in that position, what do I do with my elbows? Tuck them. Now here's the thing. What has a greater risk of injury? 1 RMs or 10 RMs? 1 RMs. What do we do in powerlifting? 1 RM. What do we do in bodybuilding? 1 RMs? 2, 3, The bodybuilders aren't doing those rep ranges. That's where we increase the risk of injury. So therefore, when we're targeting the muscle in the weakest position, what loads should we be using? Moderate loads that have a lower risk of injuring. You ain't tearing muscles on your 10 RM loads. So a lot of the times people say, oh, don't flare it because you're going to tear your pecs. Like, if you're doing a 1 RM, that's where you see it. I'll tell you when bodybuilders do it. When they do their sets of 10, and then Larry Wheels comes along and goes, let's just go 220, and then puts an extra plate on, and then things go pop. Because you've done 10s in the safe way for that 10 rep range. Now you're doing 1s, positioning the elbows flared, targeting the muscle in the fully lengthened position. That's not how you want to shift the heaviest loads. Okay, so the question was, should we still extend the thoracic spine even if the objective is bodybuilding or if we're doing a flat foot? Yeah. If I want to stimulate pec growth, yeah. I want to increase tension on that pec by picking the chest up, so taking the origin away from the insertion. Chest up and shoulder back. That's maximal, stretch, and then contract. Don't just lay flat with your shoulders rounded because someone on the internet said that's cheating, you shouldn't arch.